The HBO adaptation of Stephen King's The Outsider starts with the police detective Ralph Anderson, played by Ben Mendelsohn, finding himself in quite a spot because of the case of 11-year-old Frankie Peterson, whose mutilated body appears in the woods in rural Georgia. At first, the trail seems straightforward. Multiple eyewitnesses see local Little League coach Terry Maitland with the boy before and after the murder. DNA evidence and witness statements leave no doubt, at least on paper. But the show does more than present a crime. It drags us into a supernatural nightmare, where an ancient entity known as El Cuco feeds on young people and the misery that follows, leaving a trail of shattered family in its wake. In this video, we're gonna explore this shape-shifting entity that also has ties rooted in global folklore. Let's begin. Before we get into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. The Outsider, aka El Cuco, explained. Frankie's body is found in the Georgia woods under circumstances so bizarre that nobody can figure out how the killer did what he did. Ralph's own son has died recently, so he already feels intense grief. The new case piles on an extra layer of agony. In a desperate attempt to find answers, Ralph brings in a private investigator named Holly Gibney, played by Cynthia Erivo, hoping her unconventional methods can explain evidence that contradicts every normal rule of criminal investigation. Eyewitnesses place a key suspect, a Little League coach, in 2 different places at once. He was seen with Frankie just before the kid was raped, masturbated upon, and killed. But the man also had a solid alibi, which placed him at another location. So yeah, this was the first sign that something beyond the usual realm of possibilities was at play. The audience quickly learns that the Outsider, sometimes called El Cuco, is an ancient paranormal entity that feeds off human pain. It has prowled among us for countless years, leaving behind a trail of carnage and heartbreak. It moves from town to town, morphs into new identities after stealing blood samples, and attacks people in ways so savage and twisted that it not only kills them, but also devours the sorrow of everyone left behind. HBO's adaptation peels back the layers on this horrifying process. The episodes show how El Cuco sets people up to take the blame for monstrous crimes, all while it hides in plain sight. The Outsider's trail of destruction begins to surface in Dayton, Ohio, where it focuses on a retirement home orderly named Heath Hodges. Heath cares for the elderly, but that doesn't stop El Cuco from singling him out. It collects Heath's blood, then uses that DNA to build a perfect copy of Heath's body. After that, it steals a car and lures 2 young girls away to assault and murder them. The Outsider ejaculates on their bodies, revealing that it gains an ugly, sadistic pleasure from its crimes. This is not a simple predator that kills only for food or survival. It goes further, and that act of cruelty underscores the twisted thrill it experiences. The Outsider hides an incriminating piece of evidence, some underwear, in Heath's house, and flees town. The evidence points directly to Heath, who ends up in jail, accused of the 2 murders. Overwhelmed by the horror of these allegations, he hangs himself, which hands El Cuco an extra helping of despair. This is the monster's main meal. It gorges on grief. After this, it sets its sights on another victim named Terry Maitland, taking Terry's blood so it can assume his appearance. Then it vanishes from Dayton in a stolen van, off to find fresh devastation. Months later, the Outsider, fully transformed as Terry Maitland, arrives in Flint City, Oklahoma. Terry is a Little League baseball coach who mentors an 11-year-old boy named Frank Peterson. The Outsider, pretending to be Terry, abducts Frank and commits an unimaginably violent murder. It forces a tree branch through the boy's anal cavity so far it exits through his stomach, tears off pieces of his throat, chest, and stomach, and even ejaculates on him. This vile attack leaves the community in shock, especially since multiple witnesses swear they saw Terry right before and right after the murder. Actual Terry, meanwhile, has no clue what's happening. He suddenly finds himself under arrest in front of the entire town. The Outsider, with its job in Flint City done, turns its attention toward its next target, an ex-convict named Claude Bolton. Terry's daughter, Grace, begins seeing the Outsider in ghostly visions. She recognizes it as a sinister figure tormenting her, fueling her fear and sadness. Frank Peterson's mother suffers a fatal heart attack, which adds to the monster's feast of pain. As officers transport Terry to the courthouse, the incomplete Outsider stands in the crowd, soaking up the chaos swirling around this public spectacle. Frank's older brother, Ollie, whips out a gun, determined to make Terry pay for the horrific murder. He shoots Terry in front of everybody, but Detective Ralph Anderson kills Ollie seconds later. Terry bleeds to death, using his last breath to tell Ralph he's innocent. At that moment, Ralph catches a glimpse of something inhuman lurking near the scene. Something that looks eerily like Terry, but with a slightly unfinished face. Frank and Ollie's father, Ted, loses his entire family in a single stroke. Caused by grief, he tries to hang himself in his backyard. As he starts to suffocate, he sees the outsider standing there, watching him slowly die. A neighbor saves Ted, cutting him down in time, but he ends up in a coma. That heartbreak offers a fresh jolt of anguish for the outsider. Authorities find the outsider's abandoned clothes in a barn. Detective Jack Hoskins, who has a rivalry with Ralph, heads out to investigate. He walks inside and feels something touch him from behind. This quick caress on the neck leaves a poisonous patch on his skin. The outsider, only partially transformed, manipulates Jack into believing this patch is fatal cancer. It knows Jack's mother died from skin cancer, so it uses that memory to lock him into obedience. It promises to cure Jack if he sabotages Ralph's investigation. Terrified, Jack agrees to do the monster's bidding. The outsider, in the process of transforming into Claude Bolton, realizes Ralph is too persistent, so it leaves Flint City and travels to Texas, where Claude stays with his mother, hoping to hide from the madness. It also projects illusions back in Flint City, threatening Ralph's wife and random folks to keep them quiet. The outsider appears to Jack Hoskins again, telling him to block Ralph at every turn. The more confusion it stirs up, the more it can feed off of people's fear. Ralph gets help from Holly Gibney, the offbeat private investigator. Holly figures out that the same entity has repeated this pattern across different towns, always making sure to gather blood first. She traces it to a folkloric monster named El Cuco, a boogeyman known in Spain, Portugal, and Latin America for devouring children and feasting on misery. After connecting the dots, she realizes that the creature has locked onto Claude Bolton as its next disguise. She and Ralph, along with the detective Yoon Sablo, attorney Howie Gold, and private investigator Alec Pelly, head to Texas to protect Claude from the outsider's final steps. The outsider sends Jack Hoskins to ambush them in a cave pit, which serves as its current lair. Jack opens fire on the group, killing Howie and Alec and wounding Yoon. A rattlesnake bites Jack, and Ralph is forced to shoot him. That ugly confrontation ends with Holly and Ralph heading deeper into the cave to face the outsider alone. They find it there, nearly finished transforming into Claude. The outsider tries to rationalize its actions, claiming it must kill in order to survive. Holly dismisses its excuses. She says the outsider clearly enjoys harming its victims. It rapes them, ejaculates on them, and that it's nothing more than a monstrous sadistic killer. Enraged, the outsider lunges at her. Holly pulls out a sock loaded with ball rings and starts beating it until it collapses. Its body disintegrates, turning into a swarm of worms that die moments later. Holly and Ralph escape as the cave begins to collapse, bringing an end to this cycle of terror. A few months pass and Yoon recovers from his injuries. Authorities publicly clear Terry Maitland's name, which can't bring him back, but at least restores his reputation. Ralph and Holly continue working together, bonded by the trauma and the knowledge that they face down an ancient predator. In the show, we see them attempt to move on, though it's not so simple once someone has confronted true evil. Does El Cuco have any relationship with other Stephen King monsters? Well, people know that the outsider might be related to some of Stephen King's other cosmic horrors. It shares an appetite for human fear with it and the Crimson King, both of whom feed on negative emotions. Nobody knows for sure if the outsider hails from the same dimension as Pennywise, or if it's connected to the Dark Tower series, but the parallels exist, which makes fans wonder how many of these interdimensional monsters lurk in King's sprawling universe. What are some real-life or folk connections? In real life, the name El Cuco or Coco or Cucuy traces back to northern Portugal and Galicia. The Real Academia Española says the word coco comes from the Galician and Portuguese terms coco, which means coconut. In Spanish, coco also stands for head or skull. Many folks in Latin America refer to the boogeyman as El Cuco, while those in northern New Mexico and southern Colorado sometimes say the Coco Man. In Brazil, the monster transforms into Cuca, shown in folklore as a female alligator-human hybrid. One common thread runs through these stories. The creature snatches and devours naughty children and thrives on fear. Parents say behave or El Cuco will come eat you, using it as a cautionary lesson. People across Spain, Portugal, and Latin America sing lullabies or tell rhymes about El Cuco, giving kids nightmares about this dark, shapeless entity that roams rooftops and pounces on disobedient children. It hides under beds or in closets, sometimes described as a shaggy monster, sometimes more like a shifting shadow. The scariest part isn't how it looks, but what it does. It kidnaps or devours kids without leaving a trace. The concept stands as the complete opposite of a guardian angel. Some folks even see it as comparable to the devil, while others interpret it as the spirit of the local dead. There's also the tradition of referencing Coca or Cuca, a female dragon in medieval celebrations in Portugal and Galicia. In Moncau, a festival features a symbolic fight between this dragon and St. George during Corpus Christi. The legend says that if the dragon scares his horse, farmers expect a lousy crop. If St. George slices off the ear or tongue, the harvest should be awesome. Strangely enough, local crowds often root for the dragon, sometimes called Santa Coca. Galicia has its own stories about dragon cocas in Bentanzos and Redondela, each said to have crawled out of the sea to snack on unsuspecting young women, only to be slain by local heroes. These dragon myths likely intersect with maritime history. Old Portuguese and Spanish ships known as cogs were sometimes spelled coca. Over centuries, the stories possibly mixed, turning sea vessels into sea monsters in local lore. Whatever the origin, the figure of coca or cuca remains a major piece of Iberian folklore. Meanwhile, in Portugal, the word coco means a carved pumpkin or a gourd lit from within. A bit like a traditional Halloween lantern. Boys carry these lanterns on sticks, scaring passers-by at night. Some say that tradition hails from ancient Iberian warrior customs, when men displayed the severed heads of enemies on their spears to claim power or warn intruders. Over time, that practice evolved into a more child-friendly, though still spooky tradition, of carving faces into pumpkins. The English word coconut also comes from Portuguese sailors noticing the fruit's 3 holes that resemble a face, leading them to call it coco. The region's old All Souls' Day event includes the coca figure. Children and beggars up through the early 20th century roamed from door to door, gathering bread and sweets for Pau por Deus. They shared these with the spirits of the dead, believed to show up during harvest celebrations. Similar traditions exist in trick-or-treating or the Old English soul cakes. Some kids carve pumpkins or turnips, shaping them into skull-like lanterns with candles inside. Then they wandered around chanting for treats. This custom aimed to honor or guide the departed soul so that they wouldn't roam the earth in sadness. In certain villages, groups called the Botador de Almas traveled nightly, ringing bells or carrying lanterns while chanting prayers for lost souls. Others, known as seranderos, covered themselves with blankets or hoods and carried a staff or a bundle of basil or apples. They teased girls at harvest gatherings, sometimes sporting a lit pumpkin mask. These old customs all revolve around bridging the living and the dead, with references to heads or skulls as potent symbols. The Iberian Peninsula's Celtic and pre-Roman influences played heavy importance on the idea that controlling a head grants control over a person's spirit. Stephen King weaves century-old myths into a contemporary crime. This same idea resonates in The Outsider when the entity uses blood to copy someone's DNA or hijack their identity. It might not be a literal severed head, but the principle is similar. If you can imitate a person's presence, you can gain a hold on their life and power to wreck them from within. Holly Gibney's research leads her to connect these dots. El Cuco is only the modern face of an ancient shapeshifter who uses sorrow as food. By weaving these centuries-old myths into a contemporary crime narrative, Stephen King creates a story that feels both new and ancient. We see how a basic boogeyman can now manipulate DNA evidence, trick witnesses, and ruin innocent people with modern tools. The old fear of the dark corner or the monster under the bed becomes the terrifying realization that your DNA might show up at a gruesome crime scene you had nothing to do with. In the end, Detective Ralph Anderson and Holly Gibney succeed at cornering the outsider in that lonely cave pit. The entity confesses that it kills only because it needs to feed, but Holly points to the sexual brutality it inflicts, calling it out as a hypocrite. It obviously savors the violence it commits. She kills it with a sock full of ball rings, and it crumbles into worms. That final breakdown suggests it might be a physical life form with a mystical twist, or maybe a shape-shifting creature from another dimension. The show never fully clarifies the cosmic details, but it leaves enough breadcrumbs for fans to theorize about ties to Pennywise or the Crimson King, other king monsters that consume human emotions or fear. Ralph and Holly escape with their lives, though they carry lifelong scars. Terry Maitland's name is cleared, but that can't bring him back from the dead. Everyone else, Frank Peterson's mother, Ollie, Ted in a coma, Heath Hodges in Dayton, remains collateral damage. Their suffering served as a buffet for the outsider. The final episodes hint at some closure, though we see how the entire community was changed. And as many Stephen King stories remind us, evil rarely dies for good. A leftover cell, a single worm, or some unknown echo might lie dormant, waiting for another tragedy to spark its revival. That's the real horror of El Cuco in The Outsider. It stands as an updated, far more vicious version of the bedtime boogeyman. It doesn't just devour children who misbehave. It frames unsuspecting adults, kills kids in the most depraved ways, and feeds on the emotional wreckage like a leech. This pattern lines up with the traditional Cuco or Kukui legends, which revolve around child abductions and devouring. But King's spin ramps it up to a savage level, where old folktales mention a shapeless figure perched on rooftops. King's version wields stolen DNA, illusions, and feelings of unstoppable guilt. The show's entire second half focuses on the slow realization that a shapeshifter is behind these unspeakable murders. Holly's unique perspective helps Ralph accept an explanation that goes against everything he believes. She references older cases, does deep research into local myths, and concludes that El Cuco always wants to exploit families by murdering a child in a brutal way, and let the father or mother endure crippling guilt or condemnation. Whether it's a mythical dragon known as Coca in Iberian festivals, or a horrifying shapeless monster that parents scare kids with at bedtime, the principle remains. For the outsider, tragedy is nourishment, and the bigger the drama, the better it feasts. The outsider's identity theft resonates with these tales about how controlling a head or image grants power. King modernizes the concept, replacing decapitation with stolen blood samples, letting the monster wear the faces and DNA of innocent people. That shift to modern forensics is what truly sets the outsider apart. We see how a cunning demon manipulates the technology we rely on to prove guilt or innocence. Witness statements, security footage, DNA tests, they all get twisted into evidence that convicts the wrong person. By the time the show ends, viewers see the monster's remains reduced to lifeless worms on the floor of a collapsing cave. The crisis in Flint City subsides, and people slowly realize that Terry Maitland never committed the crime, but the aftershocks remain. Death and suicides have piled up, and the communal trust is gone. Holly and Ralph might continue working together, but they can't unsee the existence of a shape-shifting predator that thrives on despair. That chilling possibility creeps into every corner of the final episodes, leaving a sense that evil could re-emerge at any time. By the last frame of the story, watchers can't help reflecting on the nature of heartbreak and the darkest aspects of human existence. The outsider might be gone, but the grief it stirred up still lingers in Flint City. People have endured suicides, murders, and public executions of men who turned out to be innocent. That level of emotional devastation stays behind. The next time a wave of sorrow hits a small town, who's to say some variation of El Cuco won't come slithering back to feed? At the end of the day, the outsider's savage acts, child murders, and illusions aren't just random violence. They illustrate how easily a community can fracture when faced with a crime too terrible to explain. People lash out at the nearest scapegoat, and the real killer quietly feasts on every ounce of sadness. If you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks, everyone.